Welcome to CNN Talk. We are talking about Trump's sort of commentary, really, over the weekend in relation to Iran and the wider Middle East. And presumably you've looked at this Middle East plan because it's all about business and entirely not about politics, intentionally.
Yeah, but Trump's been working for some time, along with his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and others, the US ambassador to Israel, on what he calls the deal of the century, yet another attempt to end the near 100-year conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. And it seems that newly endorsed Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, we had Knesset elections last month, seems to have seen the plan before anyone else, because he just announced he's going to name a town in the Golan Heights after Donald Trump. A lot of Palestinian leaders are really worried that they're basically going to be handed a surrender document. And on Iran, we talked last week, the latest in our discussions on Trump and Iran. There was a cranking up of the rhetoric with the likes of John Bolton and others around Trump sounding more belligerent and Trump sounding more dovish. But over the weekend, he issued a quite astonishing tweet saying that if Iran wants to fight America, it will be, quote, the end of Iran, official, which sounds incredibly aggressive.
I mean, he has two different tones to his conversation, really. The one's on tweets, which is the one that Liam's referring to, but then when you see him give statements, he's actually much more conciliatory, saying he doesn't want any sort of conflict.
Yeah, he's sort of got this Jekyll and Hyde persona. He did an interview over the weekend saying, look, I don't want them to have nuclear weapons. I don't want to sort of escalate this. And in fact, actually, over the weekend, the Iranians made overtures as well, saying, look, we don't want to escalate this. Nobody wants sort of war. And then suddenly it's like, boom, like this kind of tweet is sort of lobbed into it and the whole thing is inflamed again. I actually think it could have something to do with, as we discuss a lot of this, the dead cat strategy. Look, you know, you've got big local difficulties brewing up. You've even got a Republican calling for impeachment proceedings to begin against the president. His other tweet storm is against this Republican guy as well. So again, I think he likes to talk tough on the international stage. It plays well with him. It plays well with his base. It makes America look very muscular. It makes him look like he's sort of, you know, the leader of the free world. But I think it is deeply troubling. You know, it would be horrendous to end up with the Middle East going to war almost sort of by unintended consequences, because nobody really wants a war in that region.
We're hearing a lot of that. We've got this French ambassador as well saying that the war, because of the rhetoric, the war could start out of the rhetoric, even if the rhetoric is about we don't want a war.
Yeah, it's happened before, and the more you indulge in this type of language, whichever side it's on, I suppose, if you've got a scale of 0 to 100, where 100 you have war, the meter is gradually ticking up towards 100. I don't think it'll happen. I don't think either side will want it to happen. In the end, I have to assume that sensible voices will prevail in this. I can't quite see Iran and the US ever becoming sort of close allies or anything, but you hope that the rhetoric will be talked down. But you look at what he has said over the weekend, and Aisha's absolutely right. It is one thing for interviews and one thing for social media. And I think there will be something in the back of his mind that thinks, well, I indulged in all this talk with North Korea. I got talks with them. Let's do the same strategy again. And in a sense, if it is that, I'd be quite relieved.
Much more complex, so obviously. North Korea is a very simple dynamic, isn't it, for most of the world?
Yes, and also I think, you know, Iran is a very different beast from North Korea. I mean, you know, Iran will, you know, give as good as they get, and there's so much animosity, there's so much deep historical animosity there, and there's a lot of skin in the game as well, not just in terms of the relationships with Iran, but when you factor in the wider geopolitics, Russia, you know, all of that, China, you know, it's a very dangerous situation to get into. Now, there's also a school of thought that says that actually what America really wants is to destabilize Iran to get regime change, but they should be very careful about what they wish for, because there is a relative moderate who is heading up Iran. Not that, you know, I have, you know, hold no candle for what happens in Iran. They're a very oppressive regime, but, you know, there's a great movement of the more extremists that want to take over in Iran. And if that's the situation, then I think we're off to the wacky races in terms of Middle Eastern politics.
Donald Trump has been talking about the Middle East. He's been talking about Iran. We're asking you, what do you think of his Middle East plan? Do you think it'll work?
Two very different messages from the White House aimed at the Middle East. One message speaks of peace, the other speaks of war.
The U.S. president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is rolling out a new U.S. plan for Israeli-Palestinian peace.
It focuses on economy and infrastructure and aims to make places like Gaza and the West Bank, quote, as investable as possible.
The initial reaction coming from the Palestinian Authority president's spokesman seems to be negative. He calls an economic plan without a political horizon will lead nowhere.
Unclear where the Israelis stand on all of this.
For the Palestinians, talk of economic opportunity if there's peace with Israel. But for Iran, there's this threat from U.S. President Donald Trump via Twitter.
He warned that if Iran wants a fight, it would mark the official end of Iran.
On Facebook, Mark says, absolutely not. The plan will not work. I don't think so, says Yazin. Hugo says his Middle East plan is receiving orders from Israel and Saudi Arabia. Gail just asks, what plan? Thank you for listening. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Liam, this is about economics. It's not about politics, this plan, from what we can see.
It is. There's two prongs here. The first is what Trump calls the deal of a century, a plan to try and address Israeli-Palestinian tensions that's been in the works for a long time. As we just heard, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is overseeing the formulation of that. It won't be rolled out until Ramadan's over at the end of June, and they've been waiting for the Israeli elections too, which happened last month. But there are early signs of some kind of economic baubles that will be handed to the Palestinians in terms of foreign aid, investment credits, export guarantees and so on to try and get the tiny little Palestinian territory up and running. Then on top of that, you've got what we saw over the weekend. We discussed last week that Trump was slightly more emollient on Iran than some of the people surrounding him, particularly the National Security Advisor, John Bolton. Over the weekend, though, he practiced the classic Trump bait and switch. Having been emollient, he suddenly came in with what can only be described as an explosive tweet, talking about the end of Iran, official, just to say the Persian civilization, you know, has thousands of years of history that predates that of a country I love, the United States.
This is the Trump tweet you're referring to. If Iran wants to fight, that will be the official end of Iran. Never threaten the United States again. In response, we've just heard from Iran, the Iranian foreign minister, Javad Zarif. He said, never threaten an Iranian. Try respect. It works. Let's just get Nick Robertson's response to all of this. He's in Abu Dhabi. What have you made of the Middle East comments coming out from Trump and the White House over the weekend?
Yeah, it kind of came out of left field, didn't it? And President Trump had an interview on Fox TV that was recorded on Thursday, and he actually said, I don't want to go to war because I worry about the economic and the human cost. He said, you know, I think I can do what I want with Iran, which is stop it having nuclear weapons. I can do that quite simply by doubling down on its economy. So why did he say this? I mean, what we do know here is that we're waiting for the Emiratis to come up with some answers from their investigation into who attacked and how they were attacked, these ships off the coast of the Emirates a week ago. At the moment, the Saudis seem to be indicating that they think Iran has a hand in this. That will up the tensions as well. Does President Trump have wind of that report already? Is this the direction it's heading in? But it does come out of left field. The Saudis and the Iranians are all talking about, yeah, we don't want war. We'll fight if there is one, and most people will be too afraid to fight us. Is this in essence what the Iranian foreign minister has said? President Trump's comment really just does seem to point to the fact that the Gulf states here that have embraced President Trump as somebody who can put pressure on Iran are now saddled with somebody who is somewhat unpredictable. They want pressure on Iran. They don't want a war. The cost would be theirs. It would be big, as well as Iran's potentially, and not so much for the United States. So I think this is the position that we're in today.
Peter on Facebook says he hopes the Palestinians are prepared to sell their souls. He's talking about Donald Trump here, who says they want American investments in Palestine. It seems though it's a lot of, those who oppose the sort of Palestinian ideal who are invited to this conference and are expected to put money in.
Well, I think you cannot underestimate the strength of anti-American feeling in Palestine, but also in Iran as well. And it, it sort of has echoes of how Trump has talked in terms of Venezuela. It's sort of like every time Trump kind of ramps up the rhetoric, people that actually might want to change the direction of their country hunker and double down on their kind of leaders, because they're like, we'll change in the way that we want to change. We're not going to change because you, America, is telling us to change. And I do think that Liam is right. A lot of this is economic, but a lot of this is political as well. Iran has got a long-standing history of being like public enemy number one for America. We've talked, and our correspondents have correctly contributed, saying that, Saudi Arabia, Israel, they're really big players. They're big allies of America in this region. It's often argued, actually, that Israel were the people who put pressure on Trump to start pulling the threads of this nuclear deal. Israel was saying that Iran had breached the terms of the nuclear deal, even though all the independent experts have said that actually that's not the case. And I think people are right. This is something which Trump, we know that the Middle East is like a political and military tinderbox situation. We know how hot-headed a lot of the kind of political leaders are in the area. They take great pride in sort of protecting, saving face, and all of this kind of thing. A conflict could develop very, very quickly without it ever being the intention. And the contributors are right. It's not America that will sort of pay the price. It's an area which is already war-torn and an area which has already suffered so much, largely because of American interference. So I think there will be a lot of people just saying, look, Trump should sort of cool his heels on this and just really step back, because there could be such dangerous unintended consequences.
On that, Ian, we had this from a former French ambassador to the United States saying even if Trump doesn't personally want war, we are now at the mercy of any incident because we are at maximum tension on both sides. And you can see everyone on the Facebook feed lining up against, with Iran, against Iran, against the various players in the region. There's so much rhetoric out there pitting people against each other.
Yeah, we talk about the law of unintended consequences. Those attacks on the 4 ships in the Gulf, we don't know exactly what happened there, but if you support one side or the other, you will draw your own conclusions. And it's incidents like that that can lead to something more serious. I think this economic plan is rather bizarre. I never thought I'd agree with the Palestinian Authority, but it is ludicrous to have an economic plan before you have a political plan. You can have an economic plan ready, but you can't implement it before you have a political plan. So surely, if they were being really serious about this, they would actually be launching a new political initiative to decide what should happen about Palestinian statehood and all the rest of it. Because if you are... foreign governments can pump as much money in as they like, but they know they'll be pouring it down the drain if there's no political settlement. You're not going to get the heads of the world's biggest companies to invest in Gaza or the Palestinian Authority area unless they can be sure that there will be political stability. And clearly they can't be sure of that at the moment.
Larry says Trump cannot come down so strongly on the side of Israel and Saudi Arabia and be the honest broker.
Well, we said that when America declared that Israel, it would move its embassy from Tel Aviv, a neutral city, to East Jerusalem. It would move its embassy to Israel there, which, of course, East Jerusalem is in Palestinianised their territories. Nobody knows what's in this deal. Trump's waiting until after Ramadan ends in early June to unveil it, the Israel-Palestine deal, the deal of the century, he calls it. But Benjamin Netanyahu seems pretty happy. He's just been re-elected. Only 15% of the new Knesset backs the two-state solution, which the Palestinians want. And he's announced that he's going to name a town in the Golan Heights after Trump, so he must be quite pleased. The Palestinians fear that basically they're going to be handed a surrender document in this deal. So they have to give up sovereignty over Jerusalem. They have to allow the permanence of settlements in the West Bank, which UN resolutions and countless other international observers have said are illegal. They'd have to accept the enduring sovereignty of the State of Israel. Some of those demands are reasonable to neutralise like mine, but some of those demands on the Palestinians seem, with the best will in the world, unreasonable. And that's why I'm afraid this deal of the century is unlikely, from what I know so far, to stick.
A lot of people criticising Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, because he's the one that set up this whole conference. People saying, what does he know about the Middle East? But if he's dealing with a conference which is based on business, at least it's going to have some progress. That's the argument. You know, if he gets involved in the politics, and that's where he's really in deep water, and he won't be able to cope.
Well, I think Ian's point is absolutely right. You know, anybody that who's vaguely sentient and awake knows how sensitive the issues of Israel and Palestine are. And the idea that you can just kind of like bumble in and, you know, not really backing one side, you know, how it's like the judge basically, you know, having a great relationship with one of the parties in a legal case. You know, there's so much mistrust. There's so many decades of suspicion between the two sides. I am all for somebody going in and trying to sort of restart the peace process, trying to sort of, you know, get the talks going, trying to kind of move us on so you get a political settlement into which, of course, an economic settlement comes in. And one of the big mistakes that the West has made with foreign policy, particularly in the Middle East, is that we win the war, but we don't win the peace. And that is where actually an economic plan and an infrastructure plan and all of that stuff is incredibly important. But the idea that, you know, the son-in-law of Donald Trump, who is so clearly party pre to one side, Israel, can just kind of steam in.
What do you base that on, apart from the fact that he's...
Well, he hasn't reached out to the Palestinians. He's really only dealing with the Israeli side of things. And actually, his vision is a vision we would all share. You know, we would all like people to be able to go in and invest, and we would love to see Gaza and the Palestinian would love a two-state solution where the Palestinians have a huge amount of prosperity and peace as well. But that's just not on the cards at the moment. And in terms of the investment, look, on our show that when we last discussed this, at one point, Iran was in talks with so many different big Western companies about investing in Iran. And that was actually something which, you know, he's kind of talking about the same thing for the Palestinians, yet the Americans have just pulled the plug on what's happening in Iran. They put heavy sanctions. They're really threatening Western intervention. So I don't think people will see him as a trusted narrator and a kind of honest broker when it comes to this deal.
I think that's absolutely right. And if you think, when America has been successful in bringing the two sides together, you think back to the Begin-Sadat talks in, was it 78? You look at Clinton as well. Both of those presidents, Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton, were seen by the Palestinians. I mean, they knew that America supported Israel. Obviously, that was the case. But they saw those two individuals as people who could actually broker some sort of deal. And they kind of, well, certainly in Carter's case, he definitely did. Trump cannot be seen in that way because Netanyahu is seen as his closest ally in the whole world, I would say, and Saudi Arabia not far behind. So it's going to be incredibly difficult for them to pull anything off here. I wish them luck, but I suspect the Palestinians won't even turn up.
Risa says plans have come and gone in the past. They never seem to stick. That's probably the reality that Donald Trump would point out, though, isn't it? He's trying something new, and it's worth a go.
It's worth a go, but again, with the best will in the world, it seems pretty incendiary what's being leaked. And the idea of hanging a little economic bauble in front of the Palestinians when they're going to be handed a document that politically they'll find deeply offensive. Look, Iran, the economics of Iran are much, much bigger. This is an oil and gas superpower. This is a pivotal member of OPEC. This is a country where, you know, French and German companies have tens of billions of euros invested in factories. It's a major, major economy. The Palestinian Authority obviously isn't a major economy, but we've been following this debate our whole adult lives. I mean, it seems that the 1993 Oslo Accords negotiated with huge care and diplomatic effort, now completely out the window. This two-state solution seems completely out the window. I think what we're about to see is what we've seen throughout history is a more powerful side simply asserting its will on a much less powerful side and thinking a bit of cash will keep everyone sweet. In this case, I hope it works, but I can't see it.
Benson says if his plan is to destabilise the Middle East, then yes, his plan will work. What do you think on this? Have a look at our Facebook feed and have your say. He's not a bias. He's a biased leader. So how can he get involved in the talks?
Big part of it. I mean,
but then he brings Jared in. Isn't that the point?
Well, which doesn't make it any sort of better. I mean, the great tragedy about this, I mean, I was in Northern Ireland recently, and, you know, the affection with which actually the Americans are held in Northern Ireland on both sides. Remember how difficult that situation was and still is. But, you know, Nancy Pelosi and a whole load of people went over, and the respect and the memory that people still have about the good faith in which they helped broker that deal, that is not how people are going to see Trump and, of course, his son-in-law.
And let's just remember, Tony Blair has been the Middle East envoy on economic matters for the United Nations for many, many years. What has he actually achieved there? You
can ask him that question this afternoon.
Well, I can, because when I go from here, I'm about to interview him, sadly, on the European elections, so I won't ask him. But I mean, I'm sure he would say, well, I've achieved a hell of a lot. But to the outside world, we don't really see the evidence of that.
And it's very incremental, isn't it, any progress in the Middle East?
It is. In the end, you know, international observers would probably say that Israel could do more to intimidate Palestinians on the West Bank, a lot less than they do. They would claim, of course, that they have rockets fired at them daily, and so they have a good case for such intimidation.
OK, we're going to hear from Donald Trump coming up. Just for Aisha. Will Trump's Middle East plan work? Maxine on Facebook says there's an election coming up, so what better time to start a war? Peter says Trump doesn't have a plan. He makes it up as he goes along. We've heard from his tweets suggesting, you know, a lot of tension with Iran. Let's hear what he says in person, though, when he spoke yesterday to Fox.
No, I don't want to fight. But you do have situations like Iran. You can't let them have nuclear weapons. You just can't let that happen. I'm not somebody that wants to go into war, because war hurts economies, war kills people, most importantly, by far, most importantly.
I think most people would agree with that, but when you look at his tweets, it doesn't feel like it's the same narrative.
It isn't the same narrative, but there is something in me that makes me think, well, with regard to the Iranians, maybe this is the right approach, where you talk tough on the one hand, and then you sort of have a softly approach on the other. I can foresee in the next 6 months him actually meeting with the Iranians, bizarrely. I wouldn't rule that out at all. And it is actually in both sides' interest for the rhetoric to be toned down a bit, but also, in the long term, Iran can only benefit from a good relationship with America. At the moment, I would say it's probably worse than it's been in donkey's years because of the pulling out of the agreement by America and the sanctions that have been imposed. But nothing is forever. And things do change. And with Donald Trump, we've seen things can change overnight.
It's very difficult for the Iranians, though, isn't it, as long as he aligns himself with the Saudis and the Israelis?
I have a more pessimistic view.
I'm just a naturally optimistic person.
You're just such a Pollyanna kind of thing,
I'm not going to predict war in this case.
No.
Don't predict anything, okay? That's the big lesson we take with you. But I think it is different. I think there is so much. There's so much sort of history there. And also, look, again, I say this. I think Iran is a horrendously oppressive regime. I say this with no candle for sort of Iran. But in Iran's case, they feel like they're not the aggressors in this case. Remember, they entered into a deal with Obama. As far as they're concerned, they were abiding by the terms of the deal. Suddenly, out of nowhere, you've got, you know, Israel and America saying, hang on a minute, you guys have been the bad boys here. They're doing the right thing. They're trying to modernise their country, getting that investment in, as Liam says. Yeah. You know, we have I say relatively moderate leader, but we do, compared to, you know, what could be around the corner, much more orthodox, right-wing, conservative, is, you know, extremist sort of leadership snapping at their heels. And they don't feel like they've done anything wrong. And to be fair, the international community, which has sent weapons inspectors in, has said they haven't actually done anything wrong. So if you're them, it's not like they've been doing anything bad. And everything they've been working towards is trying to civilise their country, make it economically more viable. They've just had, everything, all the taps have been turned off.
Up to a point. You say make their country more civilised. They're still one of the most repressive countries in the world. You look at their attitudes to things like women and gay rights. I'm sorry, they haven't done an awful lot in that area.
We recently had a discussion about how Saudi Arabia is doing the most horrific. They beheaded 37 people, including minors, on one day. Who is America's best friend? Saudi Arabia. The hypocrisy is writ large on this.
Iran did a deal with the UN Security Council plus Germany, and Aisha's right. The weapons inspectors have said that they've adhered to that deal so far. And more importantly, America never really delivered its side of the bargain, which was to let Iran and Iranian businesses and foreigners who want to invest in Iran use the international payment system, the so-called SWIFT banking system, which is controlled by the states, to make international payments easily. So that's made investment much, much more difficult. I agree that Trump likes to have a lot of spiky rhetoric on the go with different countries, so he can use it as a diversion if he needs to and wants to for domestic political reasons. But I don't actually agree that he wants war. We've already seen oil go up 2% in the last few hours off the back of this tweet. Trump doesn't want or need that because that makes life more difficult for Americans, particularly the blue-collar Americans who vote for him. I think a lot of his tactics are, as we're seeing with China, is to crank up the rhetoric, bare his teeth, and then try and go for some kind of consolidation where he can save the day and pull a deal from the jaws of pessimism. I'm not saying what that's going to succeed, but I don't think that he wants war.
Remember also, you've got people remember back to 2004, 2005, when there was a lot of demonstrations against the regime, and America signalled that, well, if there was a revolution, an attempt at regime change, they would come in and back the people wanting it. They didn't do it. Bush let them down, and they've never, even the people who oppose the regime have never forgotten that. So you've got a perfect storm here. You've got the pro-regime people who just hate America because they always have done throughout the 40 years since the revolution. But now you've also got those on the other side who do want to see regime change, think, well, we can't trust America anyway.
But you've got a very fragmented situation as well, because you've got some people that want regime change to make it more moderate, but you also have a substantial group of people who want regime change to make it much more extremist and much more anti-American.
The theocrats are always there. They're not really... President Rouhani isn't really in charge. The theocracy is still in charge.
And that is a big, big danger. I mean, one of the things that... Condoleezza Rice actually said this after her term and said, look, one of the big things is America has gone in over the decades to try and protect America's interests, and actually the results have been pretty catastrophic, not just for America's interests, but for the region as well.
Trish says Trump created the situation by pulling out of the agreement, the nuclear agreement in the first place. So that's your point.
Yeah,
they're the aggressor, not
That is my point. And again, Iran is an awful regime, just like Saudi Arabia is. But the point is, look, I just think what Trump tries to do, particularly when he's got local issues, and we've got this Republican, his own side now talking about impeachment, Mueller is sort of flaring up again. He knows that he looks quite good when he gives it the big one on the world stage. But let's look at what's happened in China. He hasn't won this war with China. And in fact, his own people are paying the price for it in terms of, tariffs being slapped left, right and centre. He's given it the big one with Kim Jong-un. What have the actual results been? He's elevated Kim Jong-un to being an equal sort of stature as him. And guess what? North Korea have not given up a single nuclear weapon, and they're still testing, apparently.
Isabel's making the point that you made, which is that an unworkable peace plan on the heels of instigating war with Iran and a trade war with China for re-election. So this is all about ramping things up so you can come up with a solution for the election.
Well, like Liam, I don't believe that the intention is to have war. It would go against what Trump said all through his campaign. He doesn't want America
to come up with a peace
involved.
plan before there's a war. That might help him.
As I said at the beginning, I think it would be better to have a political initiative rather than an economic one. But and all this talk about America being the aggressor here, America pulled out of a nuclear deal. That was not an act of war. That was not an aggressive act in itself. people have interpreted it that way, but in my view,
but
it wasn't.
it was quite a big deal. I mean,
Of
that was
course it
quite,
was,
that
and I opposed them doing that at the time.
That was a sort of a big deal. I don't think Trump thinks anything through. I don't think he actually wants to go to war with North Korea. I don't think he actually wants to go to war with anybody. But what he doesn't have a strategy. His only strategy is to ramp everything up on Twitter, create sort of huge diversions, and act like he is going to. And I'll tell you what, he could get caught out.
Well, Eric's point here is if I had tweeted to go to war with someone, I would have been banned by Twitter. Why not Trump?
Good
point,
imagine that if Twitter decided to ban Trump,
the greatest promoter,
44-odd million Twitter followers. I do think Trump has a strategy, but I think it's the strategy of a business man rather than the strategy of a world leader. I think he sometimes oversimplifies international conflict. Look, almost every peace treaty in the world ever has had cash involved, whether it's been very much to the front of proceedings or around the side in a more surreptitious way. I do think it's right to offer the Palestinians aid. I do think it's right to try and get some kind of economic regeneration of that area on the West Bank. But that is no substitute when you're handing them a document which they will find a complete capitulation of everything that they fought for, that goes against the 1993 Oslo Accords, as I said, which goes against the 1967 two-state solution, the pre-1967 borders, as I said. And if America does just try to do this with the kind of jackboot of a more powerful financial party against a weaker financial party, you can do that in business. If you've got the cash, you win. But you can't do it in international diplomacy when the world is watching.
Yeah, the Palestinians will not be just bought off very easily by America.
Pastor on Facebook says Trump has information as President of America that you don't have, so respect that.
We've heard that argument before. I used to use that about Tony Blair and the war in Iraq.
Moz finally says this is not Trump's strategy, this is Bolton and Kushner's strategy, and that's what's scary here. Have your say on our Facebook feed. Thank you for watching.